it's Alexander Russo from The Grade. This is the Education Show, and I am so happy to have Rebecca Griesbach from AL.com here to talk about her experiences as an education journalist and also her recent story about Peach City Academy. Rebecca, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I am, as you and other people watching this, I hope know, a longtime education reporter who started this foundation-funded newsletter called The Grade about 10 years ago. I'm fascinated about all things related to the coverage of schools. Tell us a little bit about yourself for people who don't know you.
So, I've been covering education for about 5 years now in Alabama. I'm an Alabama native and have really, well, I guess you could say I've been covering education for about a decade. I was in high school when Nicole Hannah-Jones came down and did a big investigation into my school district. And ever since then, I've kind of been hooked on education reporting. But I've been at AL.com, started through a Report for America fellowship and was covering education equity. Now I kind of cover education more broadly through a data lens.
In school as a student, I was pretty indifferent. I came to school so that I could do the theater or sports after school. I'm curious, were you a straight A kid, or what kind of a kid were you?
I was. I think in high school I started to slack off a little bit, probably because I was so involved in newspaper. My high school newspaper, which is not, unfortunately, in a lot of places, is not a thing anymore. But yeah, that's kind of where I put a lot of my energy, that and band, and I kind of, especially that last semester, definitely coasted by. But no, I mean it's been really interesting to talk with fellow education reporters who didn't have that background. I mean, there's certainly, members of my family, a lot of my friends, weren't straight A students either. And so I feel like I kind of get sort of both lenses. But yeah.
I think I'm glad you had a good experience. I wish I'd worked harder. I think it actually helps the beat to have people who were indifferent to school or had mixed experiences, because if everyone's class president, then it's going to sort of affect the coverage and maybe make it harder for people to relate.
Oh yeah.
We're
Yeah.
here. I'm a big fan of yours. It's such a delight to talk to you today. I've been looking for an excuse to do this for a long while. We're here talking about, in particular, a story you wrote, or series of stories in some ways that you wrote, focused on one of these new voucher schools in Alabama called Peach City Academy. Before we get to what you found, can you back us up and tell us a little bit about why you wanted to write this story in the first place? What was the motivation?
Yeah, so like you said, it was part of kind of a series of stories that's actually still ongoing. We have a few other pieces coming soon. But it was really born out of this big project that we wanted to do around school choice, around the Choose Act, which is new in Alabama this year. It's similar to a bunch of other kind of voucher-like programs that have been cropping up around the state. Arizona is a big one. But we wanted to track these private schools because there is no good data on private schools. And so it's really hard to get a sense of just kind of what the landscape looks like. So myself and reporter Willisha Morris and our editor Ruth Servin Smith, we all created this database of private schools in the state using federal data and also kind of cobbled together data from other school choice programs that have collected that in the past in the state, and track their tuition. That's kind of how it started, was let's just see how much they're charging, whether the $7,000 voucher, would even be worth anything in some of these places. It's not in a lot of them. But then I kind of took a different approach and used that database and started adding on. I just kind of looking through all the websites. I mean, we were doing a lot of this by hand and just, noticed that a lot of them had very different accreditors. And a lot of them, were very proud of their biblical curriculum. And some of them, you had Montessori. So I just kind of wanted to get that sense of it. Like, what are their offerings? And from there, that kind of just spurred a lot of just phone calls. I was talking with, I don't know, I've probably talked to over 40 different people just through the course of all this, but accreditors, vendors, parents and students and private schools that are participating in the program. Um, and that's kind of what shaped those stories. But the first one that actually hasn't come out yet is going to be about curriculum.
Okay.
And then that inspired like five more stories. So the Peach City story was kind of a part of that original story that we wrote, kind of talking about accountability and accreditation. And
Right.
through those conversations, it's just kind of like a, rabbit hole. But through those conversations, I learned that there were just a bunch of private schools cropping up. Um,
Right. And just to get myself oriented and to make sure I understand and to make sure people who are watching this understand, there were, of course, non-public schools in Alabama before the act came along.
yes,
You're tracking schools that are participating in the new program.
right,
And in the case of Peach City, this is what I'm going to call a new school. This
right,
school did not exist.
right.
Um, it exists now almost entirely because it sounds from the way I read the story, because of the expansion of the voucher or whatever language you like to use. And what I loved about it was that you took us there.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
we went to school. It's amazing how few stories out there these days take us inside of schools.
I know. And I know you're a big advocate for that.
Such a
And
big fan of that.
yeah,
You did that. Chandler Fritz did that in Harper's Magazine in Arizona. And just this week, uh, Stephanie Sims, I think I've got the right name, at PBS took us inside an Arizona school. Like them or dislike them, or whether you're unsure, we gotta see inside these schools.
hmm
So
yeah.
what did you find? And what was it like? Was it a surprise to you, or was it just as you expected?
Well, some of it was a surprise and some of it wasn't. So yeah, so when I learned that these schools were cropping up, I just said, okay, I'm going to try to call, identify. I'd just kind of been tipped off, oh, and then I was able to count at least a dozen just Google searching. And so I was calling them up, and there were a couple that did get back to me, and Peach City got back to me. And they were very proud of their program. This was just a phone call, and invited me to come down. So I took the principal up on it. You know, I wanted to get, like you said, a sense of what it was like. But yeah, I mean, I knew I had the kind of the context that it was sort of like a uh, Jerry Falwell school, kind of church pop up situation, and I had my kind of preconceived notions of what that might look like. The scene at the end of the story was kind of just an interesting moment for me to see, this principal in a very deeply, not shy about their biblical beliefs, but at least kind of having a conversation that you might not even have in a public school in Alabama because of our DEI laws, about feminism. They were talking about suicide and all of these things that I don't see when I'm in a public school classroom. So that kind of shocked me.
Hmm.
But I think just these themes of, freedom and flexibility were very, I was lucky to have, a character sort of that was in the principal who was just so open and responded when I challenged her too, and was, very aware of the criticism about her program. That was something I was a little nervous about going in, is like, I don't want to make it a fluff piece, you know. I want to challenge her. I guess it's up to readers to decide whether I did an okay job at that or not. But um, yeah, it was just interesting, just having those conversations with her and seeing the school. And I think the big thing for me was just seeing how quickly put together it had been, and just all of the work that still needed to be done. I mean, this is basically, they were renovating like trailers you know.
Right.
So
It
I
had,
wanted that to be seen. So
there's very much of a startup vibe. And to be clear, the school you saw was just one of the schools that started new this fall. There are lots of other schools, I'm assuming, who participate in the program that pre-exist,
oh yeah.
that just can give funding to a different set of kids than they could in the past. So that the change at another school is going to be much more subtle. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I just kind of wanted to take that angle of, this is enabling more schools to pop up without a lot of regulation or really any regulation. So, what does that look like? But sure,
Right.
you have great schools, and people will tell you that. And, you know,
And in the universe, you talk about the 12, at least 12 new schools have appeared across the state that you know of. And the universe of schools participating in the program, is that the 260 something number that I saw in the story?
right. Yeah.
So those schools are pre-exist the universal choice program that exists now. They're participating, but they existed before.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that surprised me was, first of all, it didn't feel like a fluff piece or a horror story. So in that sense, I hope your goals were achieved. You were showing us what was good about the school or what the kids seem to like about the school. It's just started, and also what maybe were unfinished, unverified, to be determined kinds of things. One of the things you mentioned though was that the kids weren't all previously private school kids. Uh,
Hmm.
some of them came from other religious schools. Some of them came from the local public school. Some of them were homeschooled. Um, Tell us a little bit about that, and were you surprised by that?
I was a little surprised about that because we know that the majority of kids in the program right now, at least in its first year, were previously enrolled in private school. So it's really just serving a lot of private school kids for now. And I've looked at some of the research on this, and I've seen that in other states it's kind of opened up to more public school families as they learn about it and kind of get time to make that transition further down. So I would not be surprised if more public school kids are taking advantage of it later down the line. But yeah, I was kind of shocked that it was a pretty even mix there. I do like Peach City as an example just because it's in a real like rural area. And it kind of, it's not your typical place where you might expect private school to be. So, serving a lot of low income families, which is what lawmakers say the program is for. So I just kind of wanted to see, okay, well, this is a population that they are aiming it at. What does it look like there?
Right.
So,
Well, I thought it was a great story to see. I encourage people to go look at it. There's a companion piece about the 12 schools in general and about this accreditor process, which a little bit reminds me of charter school authorizers,
yeah.
which is another kind of intermediary that gets set up when public funds are being used. And there have been all sorts of questions and concerns about, this is going back a long time, about who were the accreditors and were they screening heavily or screening very, very lightly. A great set of stories and also a really important topic. Tell us a little bit about, I feel like the stories that you write are not typical. Not every story, you're writing breaking news stories just like everyone else. But I feel like what you do is a little bit different than the average bear. Are you trying to do something different? Have you been trained at the paper you're at now to do things differently? Do you come at things a little bit differently, or am I just making this up in my head?
Well, I appreciate that you have that perception. I mean, that's what I try to do. Everyone, like you said, kind of has different, daily and breaking responsibilities you have to juggle. We've had plenty of that, especially here in Alabama, legislative news and all kinds of stuff. But, I mean, when I first came on to the education lab, that was kind of my goal is to do more enterprise reporting. We want to we want to write stories that feel useful to people and that can kind of wrap in these bigger topics. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think Alabama is such a good playing ground. Maybe not good, but such a representation of what's going on in the country. So I think we have a responsibility and a role to play there in shaping that coverage as a local, statewide newspaper.
And how do you stay out of the breaking news hamster wheel or the school culture wars? Adults fighting about something about schools. How do you stay out of that, or how do they protect you from that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I always stay out of it. It's hard, and you have needs as a newsroom, and a lot of it is kind of quick turn stuff initially, but we do try to do a good job of coming up and following up after those initial news pieces. I think having a defined beat is always helpful, to be able to kind of weave all the context together. But that doesn't mean that we haven't, stopped to do the breaking news, and that sometimes that hasn't, kind of taken a lot of our time. But you just kind of have to make time. I mean, I wish there was a better solution, but I think in the kind of ecosystem that we're in, where we already are struggling to have, I mean, we have so many news deserts, especially in our state, that, basic meetings don't get covered. Sometimes you do feel like you have to kind of do it all.
Right.
So
5 years in, I think you said you're a veteran by the standards of the education beat, which is a wild thing. I see you laughing. Um, are there things that you wish you'd known at the beginning, or conversely, are there things that you just do differently now that you wouldn't do anymore that at the beginning you did just because someone told you that's how you were supposed to do things? Are there big shifts in your coverage?
that's a great question. I would say I'm actually probably a little more cautious now as a reporter, and I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I think especially my second week on the job was all of the CRT stuff going down. And I've kind of been covering that ever since. And so people are definitely a lot more nervous to talk. And, you know, I think over time I've gotten to be a little more patient with people, especially teachers, especially students, who might otherwise just not talk to me. But I think it's balanced out by, I would hope by, years of kind of building trust and building some credibility there. But I will say, I think I'm a little more kind of just careful with what I am doing with people's words, just because I am so like I'm so aware of the consequences
Mm.
um, in a state like this, and in a political environment like this. So
Did you
I
have
guess that would probably be the biggest kind of.
did you have situations where people said you can I'm happy to talk online, where things went awry for them, or things that you regretted or went sideways?
Not necessarily. I mean, there have probably been a couple of times where, I've looked back and been like, like I don't want to get that person in trouble. Um, but no, I think especially with everything going on federally now and seeing people being like doxxed and things like that, it's just always like top of mind for me. So like I said, for better or worse, it might be something that's hampering me, but I it's just hard not to kind of be careful these days. So
And what do you and the paper think about using anonymous sources, quoting people who you know who they are, you trust them, but don't want to be named? Do you all do that, or do you not do that? What's the policy over there?
It's very rare. I'll say I'm working on a project right now, at EWA Fellowship, where I'm talking with a bunch of Hispanic Latino students about going to college, and just kind of in the midst of everything going on in our state. We've passed a bunch of anti-immigration laws, and everything going on federally. A lot of these, well, some of these kids were former DACA recipients, and we're not going to use their names. But I don't think I've ever, maybe one or two times, have referred to someone anonymously in a story. But I
And
think
what and why not?
I kind of am, I guess, a little. I think in those cases I've been able to find someone else who could go on the record.
Okay,
So I might have talked to a bunch of people off the record who have kind of informed, or who I can kind of refer on background. But for me, if I can find someone who is willing to go on the record, I'm gonna use that. So
right, right. I guess it keeps you from being lazy,
yeah,
or getting burned by a source who is using the freedom of not using their name to settle grudges or something like that.
right.
The other I tend to think, for what it's worth, this is just me sitting here hundreds of miles away from you. I tend to feel like anonymous quotes are a little bit underdone in education journalists. Everyone's so careful, and I understand the historic reasons for it, but there are a lot of things that people will say that they can't say on camera or on tape or out publicly, that are just so valuable, that
Mhm.
just end up not getting out into the world. So it makes me feel a little bit sad. The other thing that people struggle with a lot is access to schools. We've seen an incredible restriction of coverage that takes people inside schools, because reporters can't get into schools, or feel like they can't into schools, or maybe don't even try at this point. How do you get into schools? You got into Peach City Academy, but it sounds like that's not the first school you've been in as a reporter. How do you do it? What's the trick?
I think some of it is luck. I think some of it is, I mean, being in a statewide role where I don't have to go up against a PIO of a local school district every single day. I do have a lot of privilege there. And so, I think it's totally different for local reporters who are covering one or a handful of school districts and have a different kind of relationship there.
Hmm.
That's not to say that, there aren't districts that have shut me out because they don't like the questions I'm asking. But, if one shuts me out, we have 160 something others to try. So I think that's part of it. But
And, and you seem to think it's worth doing. It's not just adding color at the top of a story; it's giving depth.
yes, I agree. And sometimes you go there because you do want a little color for that lead. I mean, that's kind of why I took Peach City up, and then I just stayed. I stayed for almost the full day and realized, okay, this is its own story. So
Right.
you
Which
know,
I'm so glad you did. One of the things the folks at the Boston Globe did when they couldn't get into a school, couldn't get into a Boston Public Schools school, they did a sort of inside out student journalist kind of thing. I don't know if you saw the story. It's a few years ago now. Jenna Russell was the reporter who I talked to about this. They got the student to report, the schools are full of kids and cameras, right? They got the student, I think it was basically one main student, to report what was going on inside the school. They verified it, and then went to the district and said, hey, we've got this story. They ended up getting a photographer into the school. Just, um, what are the pros and cons of using student-based reporting when you really need to get into a particular district or a particular school?
I love that idea, and I'm jealous of it. And we did something not quite like that, but through Report for America, we were teaching a podcast class, myself and Kyra Miles and Savannah Trians Fernandez, who I came to AL.com with, in the Birmingham area. And that was just such a great experience because I feel like we were all education reporters and we were in a high school about once a week. There was one point where there was um, like some kind of drill and we had to take up kids' phones. We were like, so it was, a good just chance to be in a school every week. I've done things where I've volunteered in schools with kind of like poetry classes and things like that, just to be in a school. But using using it probably, but having students tell their own stories, I'm always an advocate of, especially when we have fewer and fewer opportunities for student journalism these days, or that it's looking different. We don't have kind of a traditional school newspaper anymore in a lot of places. I think it's just vital to give kids that opportunity. And if like we can work in partnership, that's even better. But I wish we had been able to kick something off the ground that was more kind of widespread. We have an internship program with the high schools in our newsroom that's been really great. But I love to see that kind of like hard news reporting, local reporting being done by students.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing thing. I could ask you questions till the end of time, but I promised you a short interview. And so I just want to say thank you so much for being on and telling us a little bit about your work and about Peach City Academy. It's really exciting what you're doing, and I'm really glad to hear that there's more stories coming along the way.
Yeah, stay tuned. I can't tell you when, but I really appreciate the interest in this, and it's been great to talk with you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.